Well, hello. Every gal needs a cowboy hat.
Scanning the room, you look for a familiar face. Everyone is a stranger. Your heart's racing, you feel nauseous. New plan. You meet 4 new people. Okay, 3. 2. You can handle 2. And then you think, I hate this. This just feels so fake. And before you talk to even 1 new person, you're looking for the nearest exit.
Okay. Crazy. Yo, who invited this chick?
My heart races when I walk into a room full of strangers too. Except it's not anxiety, it's excitement. I'm not thinking networking quota. I'm thinking, look at all these stories. And I get so pumped about talking to people that I don't know.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, it would help if I took myself off mute. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Gail Robertson, and I am Chief Curiosity Officer with GailNow. Now, we heard in that intro the talk about stories and the power of stories, the power of networking, and the power of showing up. Many those in manufacturing often struggle with how do they tell their story? That's where I come in. I work with those in manufacturing to help them sign up, suit up, and show up. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Showing up online, showing up with Google, showing up in search. And often we have a lot of questions in this area because it seems like such a big topic to take on. And that's why this guest today is going to help us break this down and help us to find ways to show up online. So hopefully you can drop a comment today, tell us where you're from. And if you have any questions, we'll be getting to the questions. I'm hoping that there will be definitely questions that Brian will be able to answer. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Brian. Hello, Brian Leung. How are you?
Hello. I'm always so excited and happy to be chatting with you. Your energy is so infectious. I'm getting so pumped up. My heart is beating because I'm excited to share some stories and knowledge here.
You know what, Brian, one of the things that's most exciting about how we met. So I want to do a shout out to Curt Anderson because it was Curt Anderson who said, hey, you need to meet Brian and vice versa. And we had a conversation and we had a connection made, and you've helped me better understand Google Analytics. You've helped me understand Google. And that's why I knew that in the world of manufacturing, we definitely need to know more about what's up with that. So again, hopefully we'll have, as comments come in, we can bring some up on screen. If there's any questions today, we can address them. Now, I've been kind of off a little bit because I was actually attending a trade show and took a week off. And so it's last week we talked a little bit about, showing up. I was away on a little vacation, did some hiking and cycling. So before we get into now, you're a cyclist as well.
I try to be, I don't really fashion myself as a cyclist. I like to bike around the city here in Toronto. But I cheat a little bit. I converted my folding bike into an electric bike. But I just enjoy going out, going along the waters, taking some time, especially in the mornings, to just go out, do some physical exercise, clear the mind before the day starts. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people out there have their morning routines. Going biking around the city is just part of mine.
And you know what? One of the things, it's interesting because I said that too on this trip. I said, oh, I cheated because I had an e-bike. But, It really is about just getting out there and finding ways to get some exercise. And I did the e-bike specifically so that we could also do hiking. So we did some extensive
Mhm.
hiking, walked up. I kind of worked out some of my fear of heights as well. So I think just getting out and getting active is important. So
Mhm.
anyway, so we talked about cycling. So let's jump into, we have a couple of comments and I want to address now one of the people we have here. This is the king of process, David Chrysler. Hey, everyone, hope you're having an amazing day. Excited to tune in. David is someone who has been an amazing also help and support to me. And he knows a lot about process and how to incorporate process into business planning. He really is an amazing person. So welcome, David. And we have another person that I do work with at Cavalier Tool. Brian Gignac says, after all, great topic. Never underestimate the power of Google. So that is a good segue to go into talking about the power of Google. Thank you, Brian, for tuning in. Brian is someone that is really, supportive of, the idea of marketing and how that can tie into both operations and sales. And obviously Cavalier Tool, who has really definitely championed a lot of marketing and manufacturing. So, okay, so let's dive into how did you become the Google guy? Let's talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, just to give a synopsis of, we talked about in the promo that you've done, 13 years in digital marketing. Tell me a little bit about your connection with Google.
So I actually first started out of school. I was hired to be a marketing specialist. Even before I graduated, I was one of those fortunate ones. And but funny enough, I went to school for biochemistry and
Oh,
business. I wanted to be a pharmacist back then, until I realized how boring. uh, no, nothing against pharmacists, but it's just not the lifestyle for me. Um, and I kind of transferred the knowledge that I had, understanding data, telling a story through data, because that's all we did
mm,
with the experiments that we would run in our undergrad, uh, writing, lab reports, right, based on the data. So I leveraged that knowledge and that experience and got into web analytics. So my first job was about uh, creating web analytics and systems where we leverage the web data as well as the database for a client list, for example. And then as time went on, I started to specialize because the data with web analytics is very, very similar to Google Ads. And back then, Google Ads was just starting uh, to take off, and I was very fortunate enough to kind of just enter at the ground floor and kind of see the whole industry spring up and transform over the past decade or so.
that's fascinating. Now I know really where you get your analytical brain, where you get the kind of the scientific aspect of this, which is really key because as someone who works in marketing, we need to have this diversity of views. Like I am more the, big picture strategy planning. And then what I do is I find people like you to reach out to because it's so important to find people who have a specialty in certain areas. You need the big picture view and then you need specialty. And we're going to be talking about that because that is so key in search. And one of the things I know, the reason I wanted you on, because as you know, I do work in manufacturing, is, in manufacturing, they get process, they understand steps, they understand the engineering side of things. And what is really brilliant about, using Google Analytics as well as that idea of process and how to use that data. So that's great background. We know that you now understand your brain works in a way that kind of connects definitely in the world that I'm in as well. So in terms of Google search, stepping into that world and why is it important? And my show is all about showing up. So can you talk a little bit about the power of showing up in Google search?
I think if we I want to start with like a bit of a story. If we cast our mind back to the early stages of the internet, um, anyone remember Netscape Navigator? Anyone remember those AOL online discs, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Yahoo's still around, but when it first started, it was more of a directory. right? So
Mhm.
those early stages of those companies are basically the portals in which we use to interact with the internet, right? All this information that's out there is accessed through Netscape Navigator, for example, through your AOL online disk, or when you're trying to find something, you go through the Yahoo directories. Nowadays, uh, I would say, over 90% of the world's population that's on the internet is
Mhm.
accessing the world's information through Google. And regardless of what you're trying to do, it could be, I'm looking for like Loctite, for example, the past few days, right? Um, Loctite specifically for bike bolts and nuts, right? But for people who are in manufacturing, you would have different lubricants, etc., that you're trying to source. So regardless of what industry, if your business um, interacts with people, 9 times out of 10, your people are going to be finding you through Google or some way or
Mhm.
another.
And there's Google search, there's Google My Business. Like it seems like everything is Google, and I'm waiting for my Google mesh thingy to kick in at some point during this call because it's going to hear their name so often.
Mhm.
Because sometimes as I'm talking, it will just automatically speak up. So, so in terms of using search, one of the things that we often hear about in manufacturing as well as in other fields is that, well, that works for consumers, but not for B2B. Can you speak
Yes,
to
yes,
that?
absolutely. I think the concept I want to bring across is within every industry, within every company. So in particular for manufacturing, I'd imagine there be certain trade shows, certain events that you have to be there, right?
Mhm.
For example, there are conferences in advertising and marketing that if you are anybody, you should be attending those conferences to network and to show up, right? Um, I think for Google search as well, there are certain keywords. For example, let's say your brand. That's a very low hanging fruit. Your brand name. You should show up if someone is searching for your brand, right? So that has to do with SEO organic. So making sure your website's optimized for Google to crawl and index and to sort through that information. And I always say, Google Ads is a shortcut to showing up on the results page. Um, and if you're there, uh, f- you know, the reason why you show up to these conferences and these events is that you want to be there with connecting with people who are looking for you. Same type of concept with Google search.
Hmm. So we've talked about this that if you're going to a trade show, for example, you could utilize Google Ads prior to the show. And can you talk about that? About how you could show up and maybe this is I think a little interesting uh, approach
Mhm.
that involves doing Google Ads connecting to the trade show. You're kind of riding on their coattails, I'd say. Can you maybe talk about that? How that could be used?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's let's go into a scenario. I've attended my fair share of trade shows as well, or even just traveling in general. Like, what happens after a long day of working the show floor, walking around, going out for dinner, maybe having a drink or two? Now it's like 9, 10 p.m. at night, maybe later, depending on how hard you party, right? Uh, you're back at the hotel room. What do you do? Sometimes you surf the internet, right? You're on your social media accounts. Sometimes you're just maybe watching the TV or maybe watching some YouTube channels on the TV or on your phone, whatever that may be. You may even be using your personal or work laptop to start surfing the internet, just to relax, wind down before bedtime. All those different screens that you're kind of winding down through are conduits for you to start showing up there as well. So let's say you met someone and it's been a long day. You can't really remember what that company's name is. But then suddenly if you see an ad for that company, it triggers in your mind and it creates another touch point where you would have, if that didn't show up, that person may have just forgotten about, or maybe have to dig through their stack of business cards or like
Hmm.
go through their notebook or their phone to figure out, oh, who is that company? But now suddenly with that ad, the brain gets triggered, the memory starts getting jogged, and they remember better what your
Mm.
company name is, what your name is, what you're talking about. So this is a strategy that I've used in the past before to very, very high effect, and it's very cost effective. Like maybe less than 100, $200. You can get blasted all out there.
And that's interesting because if you're at the trade show, you're already maybe searching even in advance. You're searching for hotels. You're searching the name of
Exactly.
the trade show, and this is what's interesting. While you're doing those searches, then your company name, you can sort of attach yourself basically to those searches. Is that a correct way to explain it?
Yeah, I think obviously there's if you're looking for a hotel room, they're not going to be clicking
Right.
on your ad, which is actually beneficial because they're seeing that ad, but it's not costing you any money. You're only
Mm,
paying if someone clicks on it. But let's say, a few weeks out or maybe a few days out, we're trying to find a last minute hotel, or we're trying to, find something fun to do in that area. When you're searching for the conference or the hotel names, and you can create an ad. It's like, hey, find Cavalier, for example. Find us at booth number blah blah blah. Enter, maybe do some giveaway or some type of promotion to get people to come to your booth. You're going to be doing that anyways, so why not
mhm.
just tell more people about it, especially if they're those are the people looking to attend that conference.
Yeah. What about people who aren't attending the conference? Is there a benefit to that as well, that are maybe searching, they're not going, but they're want to check it out?
Yeah, I think so. There's some strategy and definitely some very technical things that you can do to filter out people who are maybe just like browsing. So
Mhm.
there's reason to do that, to filter out, or there's also obviously reasons to include them as well, because let's face it, not every company or every person who is in the industry or related to your product is going to be attending every trade show, right?
Right.
That's unrealistic. Um, but you still may want to kind of get the feelers out there or get the brand out there.
Mhm.
Maybe those are the people who are clicking on your ad, and then maybe interacting with you, or would never have come onto your website if it weren't for that ad, right? So
Right.
regardless of how, I would say, like, I don't think any brand out there, maybe short of like maybe Apple, Coca-Cola, Nike, can have the confidence to say 90% of the people out there within my market knows my brand.
Right. Yeah. No, and this is where there's so much potential, because as you're searching, and this is what I find really interesting, is that we all are searching. Like, we're searching almost like, I don't know too many people. I actually met some people on Easter weekend. Yes, there's the one person that you will meet that has no cell phone, no computer, no search. Like, there's that one person. But most of the people I know increasingly are using, especially their phone, for search and getting all sorts of information. So let's look at maybe a stat about who is doing some of those searches. Now, I want to put up this for us to discuss, and then we will please continue to drop in some comments. I will be getting to our studio audience shortly to welcome some more people in. So if you have any questions, you want to know something about Google Ads, there is, and I will say this, Brian, I think people are intimidated a little bit by when they hear Google Ads, Google, like, they know about it, but it just seems daunting to where do you begin? How do you start? So we're going to come back to that in a minute. But
Mhm.
I often like to jump ahead and say, well, why do we care? Why am I having even this discussion today about showing up? It's because I'm a great believer in potential and opportunity. And often we leave so much on the table because we're not tapping into two of those things. But then there's the why. And I'm always looking at, if you're going to do this, why do we care about even talking about search Google Ads? Then there's this. Studies show 73% of millennials use your website as a key research tool in preparing RFIs. So, and it's not just millennials. We know there's lots, but this is just to show, because this is the future. This is the next level of people coming up that are going to be making decisions. So how does this tie into what we're talking about today?
Okay, this is a great stat, and I think this is so you can. We've all been there. We've all been the junior, the person who's just starting out their career and starting out the first day on the job. You always get stuck with the very like menial task. Your boss comes up to you and say, "Oh, we need a new part, or we need a new supplier, right, for plastic, or we need this mold created for this new project." Um, then what happens? Well, it's the new person gets the short end of the stick, and then, oh, get me a short list of companies that we want to reach out to, or we want to compare prices to, or what they're offering, right? Then what do this person do? Well, they're going to go on the internet and find out, oh, are there companies that nearby that does fit our needs, right? I've recently gone very much into hardware, so creating like little like hacking and modifying handheld consoles, gaming consoles,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and there this entire community of creating customized things with 3D printing, etc., etc. But then the game got me thinking. It's like, oh, what if I was able to supply this community with this one custom part, right? Then what do? I'm looking up mold makers in Canada, because I don't,
Mm-hmm.
it's a small batch. I want to keep it local so that the turnaround time's higher, et cetera, et cetera. I'm searching for people who can fulfill this order, right? Uh,
Right.
very, very, I've also worked with a client who does exactly this, where they are targeting people who are searching for their specific parts for large conveyor belt systems.
Can you expand on that? We talked a little bit earlier about that, about a client you're working on, because in the world that I'm into, I work with the people who make things that make things, especially in the plastic injection molding. But this is something that's a little harder for people to wrap their head around in that industry, because they're like, well, we don't supply parts. We run into this with people who provide services too. How do you talk about a service, because you don't have something tangible?
Mhm.
So could you explain that, talk a little bit more about that client?
Yeah, so this client does not just conveyor belt systems, but specific modules within the conveyor belt systems. So it could be the optical sensors for quality control. It could be particular weight measurement sensors you put within the conveyor belt system. I'm probably not doing it justice, but that's the
Mhm.
that's the gist of it. It's a
Right.
niche within a niche. So
Niche. Yep.
within the big manufacturing community, right, the industry, there's systems where it's a conveyor belt manufacturing system. And then within that system, there are little bits and pieces that you put within that larger system. And that's the company, that's what the company makes. And again, it goes back to the scenario I described earlier. You need a part, find a supplier, or it breaks down. You need a replacement part. What do? You search up the part number and see if there are suppliers in your area, right? Uh,
Yep.
and this is an overseas company, so it's not local, but they're targeting North American companies because they know people are searching for their parts
Mm.
in North America.
So it's, people are searching for something, and then all of a sudden, ta-da, you pop up and show up in front of their eyes. And so for everyone listening, this is really the crux of what search is all about, is how can you, find your way into what people are searching. And
It's almost as
it's,
if you have a salesperson stationed right beside someone. The minute they're like, "Oh, I need this," and then your salesperson's right there saying, "Oh, I can
ah,
help you with that."
that is a great analogy. Yes. And often in the world of manufacturing, you can have your salespeople, but then your website can be another opportunity your website and Google search, those two working together. Because as we talked about, often if you reference something, where's the first place people are going to go to? Often it's your website, right?
Mhm.
So let's come back to when we come back. I want to talk about where you came from and showing up on social media, because you weren't, and we're going to talk a little bit more about social media because that also ties into search as well. But let's welcome a few people. We have, Elizabeth Hernandez is here. So Elizabeth does a lot of work with small businesses here in the Windsor, Essex area. And I know she may want to learn more and talk to you more about some of those things for her businesses that she works with. We also have Mike Hicks. Mike Hicks is a big supporter of my show. Thank you, Mike. Mike works in the supplier industry in the mold making world. We have, David, you're too kind. So that was me saying, yes, he's a process guy. So, and he definitely does he shows up a lot in terms of social media and supporting. He does Twitter chats and just shows up in a lot of networking groups as well. And Mike, what is this Google you were talking about? Yes, I mean, it's almost obviously it is a word now. People like, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who does not. And I would even say this might even be internationally. It's a word that is like crosses all, even languages. Like people, if you said Google, you kind of know it's become part of our terminology. Brian, no comment. AOL and dial-up dates me. Well, I think it dates a lot of us in terms of remember that sound of the dial-up. Everybody, just gives us a chill. Whenever I hear a noise like that, it reminds me of dial-up. Inger says, hello, Gail and Brian. So you know Inger, because little side note, actually, Inger and I worked on developing a panel for Canadian Association of Mold Makers. Brian was one of the guests on that panel as well. And she said, love that depiction, Brian. There was one of the, when you were describing about search and how it works. So thank you. And everyone, please remember to drop a comment, say hello, even if you want to say where you're from. And if you have any questions, this is a time you now have direct access. And I know Brian is one busy guy, as you know, in his promo photo, he's holding his little baby. He's has a startup. He's has a new child. So having access to him right now, this is the time. If you have questions, please drop them in, because you have a golden opportunity here to speak to a Google ad and Google search and Google Analytics expert. So let's go to the idea of website. And because at one point, even you did not have a website because you were getting through, word of mouth. And again, this translates over to manufacturing, because a lot of people in manufacturing think, well, I'm out there, we get business through word of mouth. But I just met with someone recently who said when the pandemic hit, that's where sort of things shifted, because all of a sudden they were knocked back a bit and they couldn't have the in-person. So can you talk about websites and how that relates to Google search?
I'm pretty sure this is going to sound familiar, and a lot of you may share this this notion where, oh, I'm going to let my work speak for itself. If I do good work, people will come. Right? So I actually started. So this entire time my career, I've held a full-time job. 2015, I did the full-time job and then moonlighted a bit on the side as well. So my company was formally started in 2015. Um, And for the longest time, I didn't have a website because I also didn't really want to advertise it because I was still working full time. But I was getting a lot of business just through, referrals and word of mouth. So and so is, I may not need it. Oh, but I know someone who needs Google ads done. And it was very, very good for me for a very long time, until I got connected with McGill University, where I couldn't go through the RFP process. They were kind enough to include a small company like mine in the RFP process, but I couldn't even begin the application without having a website. And they threw the application back at, well, not physically, but they threw the application back at me and saying, you need a website first. And so I created a website in 2018. Took me 3.5 years or so to get my online presence sorted out. And ironic being an online business.
And I had worked for a company, the same thing. They didn't have a website. And then it came down to they had to do some heavy recruiting. And, if you just put a mystery, if you search and can't find that business, it sounds very sketchy too. That's the other thing. And right now, I also find I go look to LinkedIn. And if I don't see someone on LinkedIn, it's almost like, that's kind of interesting. It's like, and one of the things that talking about search and about showing up, only like 1 to 5% of people are actually posting on LinkedIn. So there's this, again, a great opportunity. And I'd say also the same great opportunity with search, because so few people are, other than, the big names we talked about, even the big names are using it. So I said,
Mhm.
if you look at why does Coca-Cola advertise? They're like, number one. And so, I don't know. Do you want to comment on that about why these big companies still advertise and still invest in search?
Yeah, I think if you put it into this context where in the past your credibility revolves around the work you do, the quality of the work you do, your business card, how you present yourself to people, right? That makes
Mhm.
sense. Nowadays, it's still all of those things. Don't get me wrong. If you do a bad job, you're not going to get repeat business. Um, but it's extended beyond just the business card, beyond that first meeting, because often, they say the first impression, and often back then, the first impression is either the phone call or you meet the person, that handshake, right? Very typical business class 101 type of thing. But nowadays, the first impression you're casting on other people is your web presence, right?
Mhm.
If there's a company that I'm thinking about working with, the first thing I do is I look them up on the internet. If there is a person, someone introducing me to, even if I really trust that person, right? So let's say Gail, you're recommending me to connect with so and so, right? Um, and let's say this person does not have any online presence, and I was like, okay, Gail, I trust you, but what about this person, right? Like, how do I know this person's legit?
Mhm.
Uh, it's to your point. It's the online presence, and it's being there. It's showing up in those places that creates that credibility. And now going back to your question of why these big companies are still advertising, is so that they still maintain that image of being credible, that image of being a big brand. It's one of those situations that if we all have that one thing that we put aside in our house, and then 5 years later or the next time you move, you're moving the boxes around and you're like, oh, this thing exists. I put it here 5 years ago, right? It's the
Yeah.
same thing. If the brands aren't showing up in places that their audiences are, it's going to be slowly shifted out of their mind, and then it's as if that thing doesn't exist anymore.
That is, you know what, that is so key in terms of, the world that I'm in, working with companies, being out there. Cause I often say, you wouldn't drop your IT because, okay, we have our IT all set up. We're just going to like get rid of that department. And you wouldn't drop your HR necessarily if you have an HR because, oh, well, we have enough employees because there's still going to need to be, there's so many things changing. And the same thing with marketing is that you can't assume that you're always going to be at the top of your game because someone is always usually around the corner, ready to step in. And we saw this. This is less about branding and more about being willing to pivot and change. But things like, when we went from Blockbuster to Netflix, right? It was a big change, and that had again more to do with their approach to not keeping up with where their audience was at.
Yeah, I think the word process comes to mind when you build up a process where so your salespeople have a sales pipeline, and there's a process to create that sales pipeline. Now you're just adding a bigger funnel feeding into that pipeline, so that's your salespeople. Um, it's kind of like giving them an extra boost, right?
Mhm.
So it's not like you have to, as you're evolving and the people are evolving how they're finding information, finding you, uh, you should evolve that process to include different tactics to build up that process for your salespeople, right? My personal history is the same thing where I'm living comfortably with the number of clients I have. In fact, I'm kind of at capacity, but I know, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, maybe situations change. People might get their budgets axed, for example, or the startups that I'm working with goes under. I have to continually be there, be top of mind again, so that I can continue building up this pipeline of leads coming through. I may not take them on as a client today because,
Mhm.
you know, my business is good, but I
Right.
know that if I keep them in my back pocket and keep communicating with them through social media, through, showing up on Google searches, making sure my website is up to date, all of this makes sure that when I do need the client, I don't need to start from zero.
Yes, that is key. And we had so Phil Glennie is here now. Phil Glennie, as I work with him through Canadian Association of Mold Makers, he says, "Great talk. Definitely agree how important it is to be immediately visible with your offering the second someone out there needs it." That is key because if you can't wait until like it's almost once someone is searching, you need to be there. You need to be visible. And that's what you were talking about. And that's where having that consistent plan, we're going to come back and talk about that, about strategy and planning and tactics, because you can have lots of ideas, but without a strategy, it may mean very little. And Mike Hicks has agreed. Those big companies are not selling a widget. They're branding and selling an image and lifestyle. Exactly, Mike. That's exactly what, and even if, whether you're selling a widget or not selling a widget, whatever, you are really keeping your brand and name out there, which is, again, goes back to building those relationships as well. And that's where search can come in, is that you're out there and you're talking about what you do, and it's complementary to other things that you're doing on social media, and nothing is ever in isolation. My background is coming out of, I was in a print world. So now when I work with clients, like I can work on print ads, trade shows, billboards, but also digital, social media. And to me, I always say it's like a pie. And you don't want to always put, again, all eggs in one basket. You need to have some complementary things. And I often say, if you're going to do a billboard, you better have a social media campaign to go with it, or a radio campaign. You need to have everything working together and not in isolation. And also looking at strategy and pricing. So let's get into let's address the elephant in the room of cost, about doing Google search and investing in it. We talked about this earlier, that you had said, I'll let you talk about the pricing, and then we'll kind of circle back and talk about how that fits into strategy, and also prioritizing what people are spending on, sometimes print ads, sometimes trade shows, and yet sometimes we'll balk at Google search, even though it's probably the foundation. So over to you to talk money.
All right. I love talking money. So often the number one question I get asked by anybody, so a mom and pop shop up to companies spending hundreds of thousands of dollars per month on Google, on advertising, they come back to me and ask, how much should I spend on my ads? Regardless of how long they've been in business, how many whether they have a marketing department or not, it always is the same question: how much should I spend on ads? But that's actually the perfect segue into how the cost structure is. There's components where you have to spend money to buy the ads themselves, and we typically call it ad spend in the industry.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there's the fee. It's kind of like your financial advisor or your financial advising firm. They manage your money, but you have to pay them to manage your money. Don't
Right.
do it for free. So typically, I would say small advertisers can get away with a very good local campaign, $150 to $500 per month in ad spend. So I'm talking about like a local chiropractic clinic, for example,
Mhm.
right? Uh, and that type of campaign is very simple. Uh, I personally charge about $900 to manage small, simple campaigns like that. For something as an international campaign for McGill University to recruits for their MBA program, for example, um, their spend. Oh, actually, I can't say how much
Okay.
they're spending.
Okay.
They're spending in the range of thousands of dollars per month. Um, and I charge them about $5,000 to manage per month. They're just their ads. Um, and there's a few startups I work with. My minimum cost for working with startups is 1,800 a month. Um, I would say I charge maybe around the medium to high end. Um, there are definitely a lot of people who charge much less, but for me right now, it's opportunity cost as well. Each new client I bring on means I'm going to have less opportunity to bring on the next client, right?
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
price myself in a way that is going to make up for that because I have finite time and finite resources. For most international campaigns, I would recommend ad spend of at least $1,500 for
Mhm.
at least 3 to 6 months. And the reason for that is a lot of the experiments that you run to figure out things, like as smart as I am, as uh, well, kind of bragging a bit here, but
And
with
you can do that because I've been working with you long enough to know that I can vouch for you that you know what you're doing. So
thank you, I appreciate that. And within all my years of experience, even if I set a campaign up to the best of my knowledge, it's only as good as what reality hit is, right? You all the best I can do is set it up in a way that I think is going to be the best, but then people react differently. I can't force people to search in a particular way. I can't force people to convert. So I
right.
have to put the campaigns out there and then let the data tell me what to do next. But then
Mm,
each time I make a change, it takes time to repeat that process. So typically, for regardless of how big or small the campaign is, typically I give it at minimum 3 days to give some directional indicator to figure out like, oh, is it working? Is it not working? Should we make a shift? And given that type of time frame, you only make about 2 to 3 changes if you're lucky, if you're aggressive, 2 to 3 changes a week. So that
mhm,
means it takes time to collect all that data to react to these changes and make the changes and react again. So that's why I typically say you have to commit to doing it, at least 3 months.
right.
And very often, it's usually the fourth month you start, seeing that hockey stick happen. Now, more and more recent, there have been cases in my portfolio of clients where within the first week, we start seeing the hockey stick because everything was set up properly, the stars aligned, and things happen very quickly, and it's good. Um, very recently, there was a client who spent about $500 a week. Um, Within the first weekend, so it launched, I think, on like the Tuesday, Wednesday, and then starting Saturday, they started seeing conversions come in. So these are people signing up and saying, "I want to buy from you."
Mm,
So real dollars and cents happening on the website. Um, but ag- I won't say it's rare, but I would say my hit rate is fairly high. I would say in the 80s. Within the
mhm.
first 6 weeks, you see results. But just to kind of cover myself and make sure, uh, to set correct expectations, I usually say minimum 3 months.
And that ties into we were talking about strategy because I see this happen a lot, and people want to go to what they're comfortable with. So sometimes that's an ad in a print magazine. It's even a trade show. It's something. It could even be a billboard campaign, but they will invest there because maybe there's a comfort level versus doing a Google ads and committing to that money, and yet you can actually provide data to show what's happening like with a campaign. So can you talk a bit about strategy and about deciding the strategic part of doing Google ads? And I think I want to tell you, and I know there was a couple of stats too that when we look at, there are, I mean, and this is a big number, but there are 3.5 billion searches a day. So 3.5 billion searches. So there's no doubt that, I mean, it's happening. People out there. 92, you mentioned over 92% of the share are on using Google. And I guess if we just say to anybody that's listening today, it's like, how are you using search? Are you out there searching? Are you online? Are you looking up things? And if you are start thinking about what pops up, what's happening, how you're finding information, it's not by chance. Like every time I go do a search on Google, I know, like, and I understand. I don't think everybody understands. Like, I sometimes tried purposely to go to other pages sometimes to do some digging. So what about strategy and how this fits into a strategic plan of using Google Ads and search?
So I have a love-hate relationship with marketing and advertising. It's one of those, the more you know, the more sometimes you hate it. Um, I would say, and I'm an eternal optimist. Let me preface that. But when it comes to marketing and advertising, I'm very much pessimistic. So the pessimist in me says every interaction you have with anything nowadays is very much engineered. So, for example, why did I buy this particular phone?
Mhm.
Right? It's a series of events leading up to that decision that someone kind of like engineered to, tickle my brain in a particular way to get me to buy that phone, right?
Yep.
Why did I buy, why am I wearing this watch? It's a very analog thing, right? Why am I wearing this t-shirt, right? Um, all of these are engineered experiences to get you to that point. Now, your question about the strategy, it's very, there's two ways that you can kind of look at it. You can do a very focused strategy on one particular tactic. So for example, within Google Ads, there can be a lot of strategy, and that's only Google Ads. But what about all the different marketing things that you can do? Then there's another strategy applied there, right? So one way to look at it is, how do you optimize if you only focus on Google Ads, or how do you optimize if you only do print magazines, right?
Mhm.
There's different strategy behind those tactics, but there's also strategy where you can figure out, okay, let's say I'm doing a recruiting campaign, right? I want to do a little bit of billboard. I want to write some ads in the local newspaper. I want to do some magazine. But now you can use search and your website, your Google Ads, to complement all these different things and tie it all together. Of course, that's informed by the overall overarching marketing strategy, but there's strategy within Google Ads that can support and kind of prop up all these other tactics, because you see the billboard, what happens? Oh, what's that company? It
Yeah.
looks like, is it nice working there? They look up your Glassdoor review. They want to make sure you're treating your workers properly. Um, for example, I hear about, safety is also very important. So how's their safety record in that company? All these, how are people interacting with your website? They interact through Google search. So there's definitely strategy within each specific tactic, but then there's also strategy that can keep everything propped up and make it even better, right?
That is, and this is a good segue, because this is exactly what I do when I'm working with companies, is that I'm that big picture strategist. And like I said, that's where it's so key, because some people want to jump in and they, it's human nature. We go into our comfort zone, so we do what's familiar with us. So if you're familiar with print, that's where you go. You often think like how you think, as opposed to your audience and your clients. And my number one job always is to ask, where are your clients? Where are your prospects? Where are they? Not what do you want to share, but where are they at? And then to develop a strategy. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about money and cost, because you have to look at what you're prepared to invest and then decide where's the best place to put your money. And it may be that, I think search is so key, but people back off because of cost. And yet it will probably push you the furthest ahead if you can bite the bullet. And you will also get how, you'll also learn more about how people are searching. And that's what I find fascinating. And I know we could talk, we're running up to the hour mark, but we're going to touch briefly on Google Analytics. because that's another key thing we'll talk about. But I do want to go to some comments because Kelly Berry is here. Hello, Kelly. And she said, even if you get sales from referrals and recommendation, you are missing out on opportunities if you're not active online. Then there's her next comment. And this is just what I think I kind of responded to, is that it says, I agree about the engineered experience. That's part of the problem for small businesses, how to find the time and money when you're not a marketing engineer. I want to say this. Yes, we are marketed to and advertised to all the time. And there's reasons. I remember one time I worked with someone who said, oh, I'm not impacted by marketing. And yet he was driving a Jaguar. So I'm like, okay, you are, why did you buy a Jaguar? Like, there's no way you could say that you are not impacted because you chose that car. Because, you know, a car is a car, really. Why do we choose certain brands? So this is where, Kelly, I think this is the key question, is that you really need to you need to reach out and get help with things. And that's where my work with Brian even has been around. He knows about search. He can do the data. He is the specialist in that area. And there's specialists that, you know, we can reach out to, but it all requires strategies. So we have a LinkedIn user. I'm not sure who this is, but it says, thank you for having this informative discussion. Thank you. This is a little different than some of my shows, which is because today we're really digging into some deeper topics. And that's, Brian, that is your gift. And then here's what Ingra has to say. I love how Brian explains things. So relatable. Yes. And then Ingra says, she said, I think there's opportunity for part 2. Yes, I think we are going to have to do a part 2. In fact, we could probably do another show just on Google Analytics, but let's just do a quick touch base about Google Analytics 101. And I found this, that often what happens is people say, when I ask them, do you have Google Analytics? They say yes. And then I say, okay, show me your reports, show me your stats. And they're like, what? Like I think they put a switch on, and I think they think the magic fairies come in the night. And so tell me a little bit about, just if we can summarize Google Analytics and why it's important to look at your Google Analytics.
So I think I'd imagine manufacturing companies are super, honed in on the efficiency of the floor or the efficiency of your sales team, right? You have all this data about, which sales team member is doing, exceeding targets, or what's their, call answer rate. Or for example, on the floor, are the machines working at capacity? When should we, you have reports on when, certain machines need to be repaired or serviced, etc. What do you do when you see the leading indicators for a machine breaking down, right? You start, oh, what's that noise it's making, or it's slowing down, or there's some, the end product is not as clear, or it's not passing QA for some reason now. What do? You go and actually take a closer look. You do what's necessary to get it back running at capacity. Google Analytics is that type of data for your website.
Mm-hmm.
And your website, you can imagine, is the conduit for your sales team, getting people into the door. So now, putting into that context, Google Analytics is your money-making report machine. So if you're able to unlock all the power of Google Analytics, you're going to be able to make more money, because you can figure out what the leading, data points are for people who's going to call you up and say, oh, I need a quote for this particular part, or I'm going to put in this big order. You can then trace back to, oh, how did this person find us? What are the behaviors this person exhibit on my website? How did they interact with my website? And from that, you can keep doing the same thing, doing more of the same thing, so that you can start making more money.
And I just put, that's a great, Google Analytics is your money-making reporting machine, because Google Analytics tracks the users on your website. And that's, I think, the other key part, is that there is a tracking mechanism. And what I do when I'm looking at Google Analytics, and Brian, you've been helpful in helping narrow down, because you can get down into the weeds really quickly, because there's so much information. And one of the things we worked on was like, what is it that I really need to know? And that's what's very helpful about the reporting you helped set up for me, is that it was about being able to go in and grab a snapshot and be able to look into that, and then report back on some highlights out of there. And what I do as part of my overall strategy is I look at, how is everything performing in terms of numbers to the site, where are people coming from, how long are they spending on the site. And also, here's the thing, you have to be really careful. You have to dig down into the numbers, because sometimes there's bots and you have to separate out, because sometimes you'll go, wow, I'm getting all these hits to the website. Then you look, there's 0 time on the site. So that was a big lesson for me, because at first I was like, oh, this is great news. And this goes down to, I think, a 101 about marketing too, is that it's really not always about total numbers, but are you getting the right people? Because you can rig things to show how you're getting all sorts of hits to your website, but it's not the right
Mhm.
hits.
Yeah, for sure. And I
Yeah.
think one other maybe story to tell is, going back to the salesperson example. If the salesperson, you can technically how well they slept the last night, the night before, can affect their performance on the day. But what are the metrics that you can control? What are the metrics that you can replicate to get them performing? The same idea can be applied to your website. There's so
Mhm.
many data points that you're collecting through Google Analytics, even without you trying. And what are the things that you want to hone in on and focus on, like you said, to make it a repeatable success for you, so that you make more money.
And this is one stat I think that's also important, is looking at websites built more than 5 years ago. And I would say, like, often poor user experience, outdated technology, and low SEO. SEO is search engine optimization. And you're right, Anger, we are going to need to have a part 2 on this, because there is definitely a whole part 2 about, if you're going to do Google search, the next thing is, what does your website look like? Is it updated? What type of content do you have? Because all of these dots need to be connected. And again, part of my process is the sign up, suit up, and show up. And if you're going to have any type of success, you need a strategy, you need a process. And to show up, you need to first have the right mindset, and then you need to suit up. And part of that suiting up is suiting up your website and making sure you have all the pieces in place. And for those of you listening that are sort of sitting there going, deer in the headlights, oh my God, this is like information overload. What I would say is to break it down into a process and start somewhere. Start with, what it is that you want to achieve, set your goals, set some objectives, and then start to look at how you can best get to that end goal. And it's not always going to be that you're going to achieve everything right away. Like, even if you want to embark on, doing Google search, Google ads, you need to really look at, putting a plan in place. I do want to do a shout out. So we have, Krista came in and says, hi, guys. Sorry I couldn't watch, but we'll watch the replay. Yes, I thank you. And a website is the best salesperson. Well, it is another opportunity. And I would say it's almost like, in terms of the term best, would be, it is another opportunity to have a salesperson along with your current sales team. And it can work in conjunction with your salespeople, as well as also bring in a lot of new opportunities. And I do want to add in, let's get this up so that we could, Brian, I know, is very busy, but he does have this. This is an online resource access that you can access. And maybe if you can give a quick 101 about this, just directing people there, if they wanted to go this route, is there a range of even cost, or what's the best approach? Like, if someone's like, I started looking at that myself, and I was wondering, okay, I was going to ask you, what do you think would be the right target for someone that wants to go do the online?
So through my years, I found out a recurring problem, for small businesses, or even people who are just thinking about starting to run Google ads, is that they don't know where to start. They don't know how to start. And sometimes it's cost prohibitive for them to start. Not everyone can hire an advertising specialist or a freelancer to do their ads for them. It may cost a couple $100. For SwiftAds, I kind of bundled all the little hacks that I've collected over the years and automations that I've created for myself to make things quicker. I've bundled that into a product called SwiftAds, and it's just using some AI copywriting as well. I write the ad, or the program writes the ads for you and sets it all up for you. All you have to do is connect your Google Ads accounts to SwiftAds, and everything gets uploaded automatically, and typically within 48 hours. Um, or in as little as 48 hours. It all depends on how quick your feedback comes back. Like, you get version 1, if you want to edit it, then it's waiting on you to approve, right? Um, so you can automatically create ads, and I think the pricing right now is 129 for the ad set and creating the campaigns and all that stuff for you. Um, and there's like monitoring as well, which is basically
Mhm,
an automated version of what I do,
mhm.
and that's $79 per month, and those are all US dollars. I apologize because my audience is US. Um, and what else? Yeah, you can sign up for free. It's free to use and sign up. It's when the uploading happens, that's when you pay.
Okay.
What else? Yeah, that's basically
Okay.
it. It's an automated me, basically.
And you know what? One of the things that I will say about even what you did with the reporting, it was a good snapshot for me to understand what you do because the automated reporting, I mean, it's not you doing it and but even me, but it gives you still that synopsis. And then obviously it's like the template version of anything, right? So definitely want to explore that more with you and discuss more of that with you. And I know we have Krista said that she does free website audits, and it's crazy how much people are like, yes, I would say anybody that's doing website audits, doing that, there is so much opportunity in that area. And Krista also, this sounds great. I'm definitely going to connect with you and check this out for myself or my clients. Perfect. I love that. This is how we learn more. And one thing Brian could certainly even offer, I'm sure, some other direction and as his life is fairly busy, but he may be able to definitely help you, Krista. And then Elizabeth said, definitely check out SwiftAds. Yes, Elizabeth, we should talk about this because I think great opportunity with some small businesses. And it's really about getting them to understand the bigger picture of investment too. And we have Chris said, as we so pricing very times with clients, so to manage this sounds like you filled a market gap. Bingo. That is exactly. And you're on Twitter. So please follow Brian on Twitter. He's doing some amazing work over there as well in terms of connecting, engaging. So if you want to learn more about Brian, go there. He's also a new dad. So I'm sure he's a little bit sleep deprived as well and still managing to rock it. But I think you're kind of working on that work-life balance. It sounds like you're putting that together.
Learning. Like,
Learning.
it was a big shift from being single to getting married, and then from now getting married, have a startup, and also have a kid.
A startup and a child, but I know from meeting you, and I know that one of the things that strength that you bring to the table is that ability to kind of manage those things and say no to some things and set your boundaries. And I think that's also really key, that a lot of times people get so bogged down with trying to do everything, be all things to all people, and instead we need to provide some focus. So we have gone over there. I will definitely be looking at a part 2 on this discussion because I had other notes. We didn't get into page authority. We didn't get into page rank. And I really like the idea of that, engineering it, because I always say you may not like it, but this is how the world is working right now. We are all being engineered and managed. So how can you utilize that to your business? Because we're buying into it, whether we like it or not. There's very few people that aren't impacted by marketing. There are some, yes, but I would say it's very few because it's so much a part of, we're seeing it, hearing it in so many parts of our life, because we have our phone, we have Netflix, we have all these shows we're watching, we have billboards, we have radio, we have Siri, we have Sirius radio, we have podcasts. More and more, I'm also seeing search and how that's used. So needless to say, in manufacturing, much opportunity. It's really important to get in early on some of these things so that you're not left behind and you're not deer in the headlights. It is a time investment. It's a money investment, but it will also be really key to your business. And we have people advocating to a part 2. And now here's a question. I don't know. Can you do a live demo in part 2? I don't know. Maybe we could look at doing
Oh,
that.
demo SwiftAds,
Yeah.
I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Sure, it's a very
Yeah.
simple thing. It's literally just an interface for you to approve ads.
And
And
what you
the
say is
ads
simple may not be simple to some of us. So I think that's actually maybe a good good item for us to discuss and look at it. And maybe that's an opportunity for you to share that even on your social media, because one of the things I learned, what we think is simple isn't necessarily simple to all. So, okay, Brian, I'm going to have you go in the green room. Please stay there. I want to do a quick follow up with you before you head out. And so I'm just going to send you the green. Thank you so much for today, for your time. And you were a great guest with lots of information. I think my head may explode though now again, because every time I talk to you, I'm like, wow, I learned so much, but also it's a fair amount to absorb, but also wonderful too. Okay. Off you go,
Thank you
and
for
I'll
the
see you
kind
soon.
words. Nice meeting
Okay.
you, everyone. Bye.
Whew. Okay. We have had so much to absorb from today's call with Brian. He really is that has such an amazing brain, a technical brain, but also able to convey it and explain it. And that's what I find is so important about showing up. He is on Twitter. Twitter is one of my favorite platforms as well. And he's rocking it there. You'll even see a little bit of information about his new baby. So next time I'm in Toronto, maybe I'll meet up with and meet the little one, which is exciting. Brian and I did meet up in real life when I went up to Toronto as well. So thank you, everyone. If you want to reach out and learn more about me, obviously here on LinkedIn, there is my website, which does need probably a bit more updating as well to add more of the manufacturing, but my speaker reel is on there as well. And as mentioned, I talk about signing up, suiting up, and showing up. And the power is in showing up when you have the right strategy and you're applying those tactics and you're looking at that bigger picture of how you can move your business forward. I'm also on, as I mentioned, Twitter. You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok. I have a little fun over there as well. So please reach out, say hello, and we have some more exciting guests coming up for May. I'm very excited about what will be happening. I'm also preparing to give a talk to women in aerospace. So we'll be talking more about that as well and looking at how to show up in search. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. We will be talking soon and look forward to connecting with more of you through social media. Please drop more comments in. If you have any other suggestions, ideas, questions, please drop them in the comments. And you can also see a lot of my previous shows on my YouTube channel as well. Okay, happy hump day. Ciao.